As promised, it's 7:05. Thank everyone for joining us tonight. We may have a few more that join in, and some others whose schedules changed at the last minute. And in particular, you're joining us for Environmental Justice in Dr. King's Beloved Community, a Presbyterian conversation. We are going to record this meeting, so if folks plans change and can get in, they will have a chance to check out later. I'm Dennis Testerman. I am the Stewardship of Creation Enabler for the Presbytery of Charlotte. And with us tonight, helping me out with some of the logistics and moderating the panel is Jonathan Lee. Jonathan is a middler, that's a second-year student at Yale Divinity School. He's going through the candidacy process with the Presbytery of Charlotte, is a graduate of Davidson College, and is doing a fellowship with Presbyterians for Earth Care, the national organization of Presbyterians that I currently serve as moderator. And then also, after I just popcorn some points of entry into this whole environmental justice realm that hopefully will be coherent in and of themselves, we will have a group of panelists that will share from their own perspectives, and hopefully there'll be some time at the end to handle questions in the chat room. So if you have questions that you're already thinking of now or come up as we go through the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat room. So our panelists tonight, we have three panelists. First up is Jessica Culpepper. Jessica is an attorney with public justice. Happens to also, this is insider knowledge that I've got, also happens to be wife of Justin Martin, who is the youth minister at Caldwell Presbyterian Church, where I'm a member, and is a mom par excellence. We also have Daryl Gaston, who is the pastor at Smallwood Presbyterian Church and unofficial mayor of the Druid Hills neighborhood, and Siobhan Starling Lewis, who is coming up on her first anniversary as the pastor at Meadow Lake Presbyterian Church in the Huntersville area. So, and they'll introduce themselves a little bit more fully as they begin to entertain questions in conversation with Jonathan. So with no further ado, let me share my screen here. So we've got, we've got co-sponsoring this event this evening, all operating under the auspices of the Presbytery of Charlotte or the Anti-Racism Task Force. Siobhan is a co-moderator of that task force. We have the Community Disaster Response Team, the Stewardship of Creation Ministry, and 10 Cents a Meal Committee. There are many definitions of environmental justice out there. You can Google on the internet and find any number of those. Here's one: environmental justice is a clear place where social justice, environment, hunger, and poverty come together. I like this one because it reflects the intersectional nature of environmental justice. We are here this evening on the holiday edition of Martin Luther King birthday. And we have this quote, courtesy of Interfaith Power and Light: "We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny." Quote from Dr. King. And opinion from the chair of Interfaith Power and Light, Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. If Dr. King were alive today, he would be the drum major for justice, marching to protect the environment and its inhabitants. We open our Presbytery meetings, for those of you that have been to one of those in the last several years, with a land acknowledgement, acknowledging that we inhabit the land of the Catawba Indian Nation. Climate change matters. Justice for the earth is justice for all. So thinking about our Native American brothers and sisters at the Presbyterian for Earth Care Conference, actually the last two conferences that we've had, our last two biennial conferences, we've offered a Kairos blanket exercise simulation that helps the participants experientially walk through the 500-year history of people who were indigenous to North America. And I've got a quote here from a Presbyterian News Service report about that exercise at our conference at Stony Point Conference Center 2 years ago. After hearing it described as a participatory history lesson, participants took in the history of indigenous people freely moving about America just over 500 years ago before the settlers from Europe came, feeling they had the right to take the land due to the doctrine of discovery. If you're not familiar with the doctrine of discovery, I would encourage you to do an internet search of that term. And its partner Manifest Destiny in terms of how the this country was colonized. And a photo from that the blanket exercise at Stony Point. You can see folks standing on the blankets on the floor, and as the simulation goes on, more and more of those blankets are removed, reflecting, among other things, how land grabs were taking place. And so the rug was being pulled out from under the Native Americans, and they were relegated to smaller and smaller places in this country, to the point now where we've got this network of reservations set up. So the Poor People's Campaign has also, along with Interfaith Power and Light, has been on the forefront of talking about Dr. King's legacy, his dream, and how, if he were alive today, that it would inevitably be dealing with environmental justice as one of the ways in which these issues are intersecting in our world. We rise to change the moral narrative and demand that the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, and the war economy / militarism, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism all be ended. The history of First Nations, Native Americans, and Alaskan Natives in the U.S. reveals that these attacks on democracy follow a long legacy of subjugation, from the doctrine of discovery that was used to justify the takeover of indigenous lands to the ongoing attempt to undermine and constrain tribal sovereignty and authority as independent nations. The U.S. has been waging a full-scale war on the very right of indigenous people to exist. This begins with the belief that these people do not matter, therefore, taking away their political independence becomes possible, and with that, their resources, wealth, and culture. The Presbyterian Church USA passed a resolution, adopted policy in 2018 at the General Assembly biennial meeting in St. Louis on environmental racism and justice. Let's spend a moment walking through the a little bit of that policy statement. So the policy statement called on us to renew our denomination's call to promote environmental justice and oppose environmental injustice in all its forms. Take action to respond to environmental racism and environmental injustice in all its forms. To provide educational resources to churches and mid-councils about environmental racism and injustice. To provide information and resources to better enable buildings and operations of churches to be more environmentally sound. And to listen to the perspectives and voices of people most impacted by environmental racism with awareness to cultural diversity and domestically and internationally. We refer to these as frontline voices. In accordance with the gospel, position the church's approach to environmental problems to include responses to the voices most directly impacted by environmental racism. Davidson College, Jonathan's alma mater, hosted an event last year, a presentation by Robert Bullard, who is, as you see in this slide, considered to be the father of environmental justice. Speaking on climate change as a human right, why equity matters. We have our own homegrown environmental justice shero here in North Carolina, Eva Clayton. Eva is a Presbyterian and is from Warren County, where PCBs, byproduct of the used in electrical transformers, among other applications, were illegally dumped along roadsides in Cabarrus County rather than being properly disposed of, and launched environmental justice movement here in North Carolina that continues to this day. Just to show you some of the number of ways in which our environmental impacts, some of the environmental impacts that we're dealing with, and all of these that you see depicted here had adverse impacts on
Turn the video on.
communities of color. Just some quotes here, some quotes here from the Guardian newspaper about assassinations, murders of environmental defenders. I'm not going to read through these, but I will just say that I had an opportunity to go to Guatemala and Mexico to visit communities, indigenous communities that are producing eco palms that a number of our churches use on Palm Sunday. Twice I've hosted representatives from those projects here in the United States as they've gone around and spoken to churches and in academic settings. And the last time they were here, we had a conversation over supper about these murders of environmentalists. One of the folks that was here with us said he was in a room when someone was assassinated. I believe Daryl Gaston is going to say a little bit to us about the interface of hobbies, environmental hobbies, and environmental recreation. But just this was a presentation just this past year about parks and green space inequity in marginalized communities. And many of us heard accounts this past year about the birding incident in Central Park. Last year was an incredibly difficult year for hurricanes. These storms, with the flooding that goes with them, adversely impact communities. Those of us that have lived in North Carolina for a while know the impact that Hurricane Floyd had on Princeville in Edgecombe County, which is the oldest incorporated African American community in the United States. We've also been seeing news reports in the past couple of weeks about the fact that just about every year so far in this century has set a record as the hottest year on record. So like 19 of the last 20 years have been the hottest years on record, something along those lines. Flint has been very much in our news recently. Presbyterian Church has played a role in shining the light on the injustices in that situation. Here we see a screening of the film about Flint that was held by the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance Program. Didn't get a picture to go on with this one, but the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality has an environmental justice committee. Secretary Reagan of the Department of Environmental Quality, as many of you heard in the news, has been tapped by Joe Biden for a prominent position in his new administration. And Rodney Sadler, who's a professor at Union Presbyterian Seminary here in Charlotte, serves on this Environmental Justice Committee with this State Department here in North Carolina. Another reminder that we use the environment for the dumping ground for our byproducts and our pollution, and again, adversely impacts marginalized communities and people of color disproportionately. Effects on our crops, so our ability to feed the world, or being challenged by climate change and global warming. Also impacts to health. Dr. King's words suggest that all of creation, all these creatures that we share the planet with, are our brothers and sisters. We're all connected, as that quote that we read early on suggests. Solar energy. We're looking more and more at renewable energy, and there's a role that churches can play in being models and leading the way in using energy to help us reduce carbon impacts as early as 2030. We've really got to up our game. There are some pay-as-you-go options on solar power that can make adoption of solar power easier in developing countries and in marginalized communities here in the United States. This just came in an email today from RAFI, Rural Advancement Fund International, which is in Chatham County, based in Pittsburgh. As we pause to remember and honor Dr. King, Dr. King's impact on the world, many may ask, what can I do? RAFI believes one of the best ways to respect Dr. King's legacy is to continue his work. You can do so by standing up for justice for Black farmers. Black farmers have long faced discrimination, which has greatly reduced the numbers of Black farmers today. In 1910, 14% of all U.S. farmers were Black. Today, less than 2% of all farmers in the United States are Black. Much of this discrimination happened at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where racial discrimination resulted in the drastic loss of Black-owned farmland. I will say that Joe Biden has selected an African American. Well, with the changes in Congress, there will be an African American at the helm of the Senate Agricultural Committee, who has already pledged to try to address some of these injustices from the past and to focus on hunger and climate change. So he's looking at his role intersectionally. So to close this time out, again, this is from today, late breaking. Those of you that might have woke up and listened to Morning Edition on National Public Radio, they had an interview and read Langston Hughes' poem, I Dream a World, that was the uh, the inspiration for Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. I dream a world where man, no other man, will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth, and every man is free, where wretchedness will hang its head, and joy, like a pearl, attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream, my world. There's a link there that I can't expect you all to memorize or write down very fast, but if you're interested, their NPR is sponsoring a poetry contest to use Langston Hughes' poem as a template for writing a contemporary poem, and then submit those to National Public Radio for sharing on their website. So those of you that are artistically inclined, this is yet another way to be a voice for environmental justice. So with that, I will turn things over to Jonathan to take us forward into a conversation around this timely topic.
Great. Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you for that little introduction about environmental justice and for giving us little examples that we can talk about here. So good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Lee. Like Dennis said at the top of our hour together, I'm a second-year student at Yale Divinity School. I am Charlotte native, born and raised, went to high school here in the area, and also continued my education at Davidson College, staying within Mecklenburg County basically my entire life, where I was a major in environmental studies and religion, and a minor in religion. And tonight we have three wonderful speakers with us. If they could, I would like to invite each one of them to unmute themselves and to give a more detailed description of who they are. And so if our speakers don't mind, we'll start with Siobhan. That's the first name I saw. And then we'll go to Daryl and Jessica.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So blessed to be with you. I'm very grateful that we're having this conversation. I'm the Reverend Siobhan Starling Lewis. I pastor at Huntersville Presbyterian Church, Meadow Lake Presbyterian Church in Huntersville, North Carolina, and I live in Davidson. And really grounded in the work of anti-oppression work as being key to our understanding of what it means to be faithful people in the world. And when it comes to this conversation around environmental justice, and particularly on this day of Martin Luther King Jr., those words of injustice anywhere, the threat to justice everywhere, and knowing that there is so much disparity and so much of a broken and sinful, and just in some ways just lies that we've believed about how we must operate, that root so much of the work, the ways that we are moving through without thinking. Without being caring, without being compassionate. And I'm super grateful that we're having a time to discuss this intersection of what it means to co-create with God, beloved community with each other. Aside from being a pastor here, I've also served as a pastor in Oklahoma and Rhode Island. And that has given me a window into I'm from Florida originally and went to seminary in Georgia. My husband was in the Coast Guard, so we also lived in Virginia. And so moving around a lot has given me a window into some of the patterns around just injustices in general and environmental injustices, and how we as a church can be a part of that healing in the world, can be a part of the shalom coming into the world. So I'm super grateful to be with each of you all tonight. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm grateful for this time.
Jessica, I am a Southern gentleman, so I would like for you to go next, please.
Thank you, Daryl. That's nice of you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Culpepper. I'm the director of the Food Project at Public Justice. Public Justice is a national legal advocacy organization, and the Food Project is focused on dismantling the harms from industrialized farm animal food production. Specifically, we are focused on dismantling corporate consolidation of power. We believe that our agriculture system is born out of white supremacy. And so in order to do the work that we want to do and deal with the environmental harms and the worker justice harms and the consumer harms and all of these things, we need to increase democracy and dismantle white supremacy as part of everything we do. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about environmental justice. It is a root of the work that I do. I am also, as was mentioned by Dennis, the wife of Justin Martin, who is a pastor, the youth pastor at Caldwell Presbyterian. And I think that he has this saying, you hit him in the head, you hit him in the heart, you hit him in the hands. And that has really guided me in terms of how I think about and connect this work to God and, through his ministry and through parenting. So even outside of my work, I'm really excited to talk to you about all of this.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. I am Daryl Gaston. I am a native Charlottean. I serve as the pastor of Smallwood Presbyterian Church here in the Biddleville Smallwood community. I also served as the co-founder of the North End Community Coalition. My wife, Melissa, and I founded this coalition, which is a nonprofit, about 6 years ago, and we serve 8 neighborhoods in the inner city of the North End. Those neighborhoods are Lockwood, Graham Heights, Druid Hills, John Taylor Williams, Bright Walk at Historic Double Oaks, Genesis Park, the Park at Oaklawn, and Greenville. I also serve as the president of the Druid Hills Neighborhood Association, and I consider myself a servant leader, and I believe that servant leadership is love in action. And I'm honored and privileged to be in this space tonight. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you to the 3 of you for those introductions. And again, thank you for being here. Just a note that we do want to have some time for questions, but given that we're already halfway through the hour and we do want to respect everyone's time, it might be best if you do have a question for one of our panelists, please put them in the chat. And then, so if the panelists are looking at the chat as we're going, they can address it perhaps, or at the end, we'll be able to have those questions ready so that we can put them up for discussion. So my first question to the 3 of you, and perhaps we could just go in the same order that you all introduced yourselves, is related to what your first exposure was and your reaction to this term of environmental justice. I know the first time I learned of it was during my time at Davidson College, learning about the brownfield locations, the toxic waste dumping sites that are located in that area, and how they are concentrated among certain populations, predominantly Black minority populations, versus the predominantly white populations on the one side of the railroad tracks. And talking to professors and talking to other students about the injustice about all of that. So I'm curious about, how did the 3 of you first hear about this term, and how do you understand it? And because we might have some people in this call who aren't as familiar with the term and its ins and outs, how would you explain environmental justice to them? I know it's a lot, so pick and choose how much you want to chew off of that.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think when it comes to environmental justice, I think the idea and the term arrived at two different points for my life. I think intuitively, as a child even, I noticed living on the south side, a predominantly Black part of St. Petersburg, Florida, but being sent to school in the north part of the city, I could sense the difference between how close the grocery stores were, or how easy it was to get to food that was like healthy and not just in a bag. I think intuitively I noticed what kind of restaurants were available in different parts of town, and how people, because I find that food, especially as a child, is one of those things that was just we absorb, we notice what we're eating and how we're eating. And I would go visit friends and notice that their neighborhoods were spread out differently, and there were more sidewalks or more space, or green space in certain parts of the city. And so intuitively I knew there's a difference in how we're using the gift of space and ground and air and food in my predominantly African American neighborhood, and versus the neighborhood that I may go visit with my friends, or the larger areas of St. Petersburg. So I think it was there as a child, probably noticed it around 6, 7, 8 years old. Something was different, something was up. I think I was first introduced to the term formally, actually not until seminary, and sitting under the tutelage of womanist ethicist Marcia Riggs and Bill Brown over at Columbia. And even like Christine Yoder, when we would think about the Old Testament script, and Bill Brown and Christine Yoder was Old Testament professors, and talked a lot about creation, talked a lot about wisdom, and how we're called to be stewards of this really beautiful gift that is the earth and the ground and the world that we've been given. And I think because I came in contact with the term in a theological setting, I think I've always been able to make that connection between how God is calling us to be more faithful towards the work that we're doing. I think in general, my definition of environmental justice is being a and I'll admit, I see everything through a theological lens, and I consider myself a public theologian above anything else. And so in my language, it would be interwoven with this faith conversation. So it is being a faithful steward of the gift of the creation that God has given us for the purpose of the flourishing of all of creation. That's what it means to have the justice, and to have the injustices are realizing that there are sins and broken patterns, things that we have done and things that we have left undone, that are creating a fissure and a gap. And that as faith people, we're also called, aside from being able to imagine what it is, to be a part of that reparations work and to be preparers of that breach. And so us thinking collectively and as individuals in our own discipleship as Christians on how we're called to use the gift of the world that we have is really deep in my understanding of the work. So I'm so weird. I'm going to say it. So we've gotten pretty far in the conversation, and I feel like we haven't thrown, like, there hasn't been some scripture. And so I just want to say, like, for me, part of when I was thinking about why I think is important as a part of the anti-racism team here in this presbytery, I go back to Psalm 24 and just the first two verses. The earth is the Lord's and everything that is in it, the world and those who live in it. And I'm going to use more inclusive language. For they have founded the seas and established it on the rivers. And with water being vital, even to our theology of sacraments, there's just a call to be connected to what God has given us and how to take care of it.
Yeah, Jessica.
Sure. Hi. So I think Siobhan is right that the idea of environmental justice and environmental racism, I think, is something that we bear witness to and experience before we learn the term given to it. For me in my work, it's really important that people participating in the environmental justice movements have defined it for themselves. And, our job is to take their lead because we understand that there are plural definitions of environment. And so the way that it impacts various communities is different, right? But there's a couple things that I think are consistent that we honor with our community partners through our work. And one is this notion that environmental justice is inherently tied to white supremacy and environmental racism. And so the presence of environmental justice means that your values and institutions and structures and policies and rules and regulations, you know, that they support the ability to live in whatever environment you're in, be it your work environment, your home environment, the environmental benefits of like being able to go out in a green space, whatever that is, that is not interrupted by environmental racism of any kind. You know, with a lot of our community partners, there are some really important rights that we associate with it. Things like the right to democracy, the right to have a seat at the table and actively and equally participate. You know, the right for equity in benefits to the environment. And, you know, I think just the right to define what is a safe and healthy workspace for themselves and living space for themselves. And so, you know, that really drives the decisions we make and the work that we do is to follow the lead of fence line communities, of frontline communities, of impacted communities.
Well, I guess I'm up now. And I would say that I grew up, I was born in 1961 in Druid Hills, the community of Druid Hills, and I was asthmatic as a child. And I would often question my parents as to why I struggled to breathe, why I could not roll around and play around like so many of my other friends could. And, you know, I quickly learned that I lived in a community where there was a lot of I-1 and I-2 land, industrial land, where particulate matter was being spewed into the atmosphere. There were many different odors or a variety of odors that I grew up smelling in and around my community. I lived very close to a community where that particular community was built on top of a construction dump site. So environmental injustice was a part of my upbringing. And then in terms of thinking about racism and environmental justice, if you will, I struggle even today when I visit with friends who live in other communities other than the 8 neighborhoods that I mentioned earlier in the neighborhood, where there are parks with adequate infrastructure for people to walk, to play, to enjoy being outside, and trees and things of that nature. I struggle with the fact that our neighborhoods have parks as there are other parks in South Charlotte and East Charlotte and West Charlotte. So there's equity there in having a park, but it's not genuine equity, because if I have a park that is dilapidated, that's struggling, doesn't have proper infrastructure, then my brown and Black children in my corridor cannot play in that space safely. So as a result, you know, I have to raise Cain or raise hell with Mecklenburg County Park and Recreations to get due justice in the North End corridor for our residents. So that's a problem. And, you know, I think about how oftentimes, I think about how oftentimes than most, we struggle with individuals who want to move into the North End corridor with heavy machinery and trucks and things of that nature. And then when we come together as residents and tell them, no, you're not welcome in our corridor. And when we have individuals, when I have a white male stand before me and tell me that they don't want my business in South Charlotte, so we're trying to move to the North End corridor. Well, what makes you think that we want you in our corridor? So we pull together, we work together, we show up in those spaces where people don't expect us to attend meetings, and we shut people down. I'm known for taking over your meeting and letting you know that this will not happen in our corridor. And I'm very good about going to the top. My brother Dennis, he knows I don't play, because this is what I know. Whether or not you like me or not, that's negotiable, but you will respect me. There's no negotiating with that. I'm going to be respected. The people that I serve will be respected. I think that God, in his love for us, he gave us this planet, and we're to care for this earth. But more importantly, we are to care for each other. We're to love and to care for each other. We're to love thy neighbor as thyself. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. And I could see you taking hold of the conversation, taking hold of the meeting in front of our very eyes. So thank you for the pause. So for my second question, Dr. King says, since we are honoring his name and legacy by meeting today, and in particular, writes in the collection Nonviolence, the Only Road to Freedom. Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our lives. So my question to the three of you, and perhaps we can, if one of you would like to answer first, we don't have to go in the same order. My question is, what kind of qualitative or quantitative changes do you believe are most important for us to embrace on our path to environmental justice for all? So if anyone has a response, feel free to speak up, and then we can go from there.
Ladies.
Such a gentleman. Thank you. Well, I think there's quite a few qualitative things that need to be cultivated. One are all of there's a wonderful article, I'll put it in the chat, by Tima Oklone that talks about white supremacy culture. And one of the reasons I love this particular resource, I literally share it almost everywhere I go, because I kind of consider it a DSM for those who are psychology nerds, when it comes to white supremacy culture, is because it offers antidotes. And one of the realities is that there's a huge commodification and a huge perfectionism and a huge laying on of these white supremacy culture aspects in how we are living in the world, that then ruptures the ability to have faithful relationship with each other. It ruptures the ability to have the common good, overcome the individual. We run into conversations and real issues about power over or power under rather than power with each other. And I'm not Pollyanna. I'm not kind of in some bubble where I think these things, but I think as Christians, we can faithfully engage this work. And so some of the qualitative things that need to change is that we need to be more collaborative. We need to learn how to share. I think even within our denomination that calls itself collectional, we do a horrible job of truly sharing our resources together. And environmentally, that means we are reproducing things that don't need to be reproduced, that we could be sharing and allowing those resources to go towards other things. And I think that points to some of the quantitative uses. We can literally see by the way we use our budgets, by the way we use our time, by the way we use our buildings, how we're using the things that we have. Aside from the work that I do in the Presbytery and at my church, I'm also on the next church leadership. And we've been talking a lot about something called cultivated ministry, but one element of that is mutual accountability, and just the ability for us to hold each other accountable for that work, so that it isn't a power over in the traditional hierarchical understandings of how we care for our environment or each other. Oftentimes these systems are built where people who are in the most amount of distress are expected to have the highest amount of productivity in these stressful situations of being under-nurtured or with poor water or with poor air. And yet the societal expectations or words are that these folks who are enduring these stressors are lazy or without discipline. And there is no naming that the system itself and the environment itself is a huge impact on these individuals and their lives and the communities at large. So I think how we think about what we use and looking at how we use our budgets and how we budget our times and resources of all sorts is the quantitative. But cultivating those spiritual responses of compassion and humility that says we want to have a posture of learning, particularly if you're in a space when you have affluent resources, becomes part of the qualitative work.
Jessica, are there, oh, yes, I see Jessica's unmuting.
Sure. I think Siobhan said it beautifully. So I think the best thing I can do is add on to what she said and take it in a direction to say that, you know, our institutions are harder to change because democracy has been eroded. And that incredible work that Siobhan just talked about that would help people, you know, walk together on their power journey, you know, to equity and justice. It's very, very difficult right now with things like Citizens United and the failure to stop, you know, monopolies and things, issues like that. Because until we have a government that listens to people and not profits, it's going to continue to benefit the few over people. And, you know, so I think that this is in addition to what Siobhan said, that, you know, we need to dismantle systems that just are eroding democracy. I think that needs to be done on every level, right? Not just, you know, not just in DC, which is so incredibly important, but like in the school boards and on the town councils and every single level, because corporate power and white supremacy has been very, very smart and strategic at going to every level and from every level. And so I think we need to do the same, you know, in linking the notion of democracy with our notion of justice and dismantling white supremacy.
I echo exactly what my two sisters have just said, and I'd like to just share. Several years ago, I had the desire to become more informed about birds, nature, and community. And so I sought out to become a certified wildlife habitat steward and to undergo some development through Audubon. And I attended an orientation at a church that will go unnamed in the Myers Park community. And when I arrived at that event, there were some people there that I did know who did not have the same hue as myself. That's how I was invited. However, as I moved through the space of the classroom, I had this middle-aged, white, seasoned female to approach me with her raised eyebrows. And she looked at me and she said, "I don't know you. Who are you?" And I said, "And I don't know you either. Who are you?" And she told me her name, and I told her my name. Then she went as far, was bold enough to say, "Well, how did you get here?" And I said, "I drove a 2003 Toyota Celica GT." And I shut her down, stepped away from her, never to communicate with her again. Well, what I want people to understand is that brown and Black people show up in spaces and have a right to do so. You know, we don't have to be ostracized, criticized, um, or have to have someone else to, well, let me say this. I do not require anyone else to validate my worth. I know that I'm visible, vital, and valuable. And when I come to the table, my contribution is my worth. And I don't come being arrogant because I realize that everyone at the table has value and worth. And, you know, I'm very happy to say that I'm Black and I'm proud to be Black. I would not want to be white, because if I was a white person, then I would be caught up in this same system that my other white brothers and sisters struggle with every day, with this hierarchy of being the top in the caste system. So I thank God that He created me Black, and I'll continue to show up in these spaces and express myself.
Thank you for that anecdote, Daryl, and thank you to the everybody for sharing. It seems to me that to get to this final goal of environmental justice, there needs to be more identification with one another and also with ourselves, and recognizing our situatedness and our social location as it's related to others. So thank you for the three of you for bringing that up. I think that actually ties very well with the question that was brought up in the chat. So from Jennifer Roberts, a recent poll by the Environmental Defense Fund found that 65% of white people are not aware of environmental justice, and almost as many have never heard of redlining. What efforts to educate more folks, to connect the dots with poor health, educational outcomes, and more are currently underway? And I might, I guess, add to that a little bit, since this is where our conversation seems to have gone, is that what efforts to educate more folks about connecting the dots with poor health, poor educational outcomes, and race in particular, and educating people about showing up and witnessing to themselves and to their own racial identity as it interacts with other people, do you know are currently underway in your own communities, in your own work, or particularly in the Charlotte area?
Well, let me speak to that, ladies. I love Jennifer Roberts dearly, but I realize that it's up to white folk to do the work. You can Google it, you can research it, you can do whatever you need to do to find out how to be a better person and how to treat human beings as just that, human beings, regardless of their skin color or their income or educational background. And also, I am willing to allow anyone to meet with me via Zoom during this pandemic, and I'll be more than happy to give you a free course in Daryl Reginald Gaston Blackology 101, because I think that that's where it begins. You know, we have to realize that we're more alike than different, and people have to experience a broken and a contrite heart to have the willingness to want to learn, to want to grow, to want to be open to the nuances of engagement and moving out of what you've been taught and then learn about what you need to know. And I'm gonna hit the ball to Siobhan.
Oh, thank you. I caught it. I'm really excited to be able to offer a few practical things. So, along with my co-moderator, Reverend John, I thought I saw him earlier. Cleghorn. Yeah, there you are. We are co-moderating the anti-racism team for our Presbytery, and super excited that for the first time, anti-racism training is being required. Hear this now, required for the clergy leadership and those who are serving on boards within or councils within the Presbytery. And why I am so excited is because the same way we have boundary training, some of you all know about that, it's the same level of requirement, and the exact questions that have been posed of how and what does the system look like. We are actually presenting to council the curriculum and the programming tomorrow, but it really builds that story in a theological conversation at the same time. And the reality, as Pastor Darrell has said, is folks have to do the work, but also the systems that we are a part of have to be a part of people doing the work too. So I think, as many ways as we can come at it, there are going to be some people who are intrinsically motivated for this work. They're going to bump up against something within themselves and say, I got to grow. Something's not right here. Some people, and I truly believe it's the work of the Holy Spirit, will run up against the gift. I'm going to say it, the gift of guilt. Guilt is a gift. It is different than shame. Shame shuts us down and says that we are the things that we are guilty for. Guilt is the work of the Holy Spirit to say there are things that I have done that I should not have, and there are things that I have left have done that I should. And that is both as individuals and communal sins. There is work to be done. And that sometimes is enough to get somebody motivated so that they can get into the learning spaces they're called to be, whether it is Google or finding a class. Invest money so that you can be a better person. People invest money in all sorts of things for fun. Figure out how to be more of who God's called you to be. It's an invitation. But also the work of having an anti-racist system, being a part of helping to form people. I love the fact that as Christians, we are a part of a Reformed tradition where we say we know that we're reformed and always being reformed. And we know that the process of doing church, being church, living as church is formative to how we understand our role as disciples of Christ. So we can do the work together in a way that actually promotes it. Other places, and I've mentioned it earlier, I'm a part of Next Church Leadership. They've just done a new curriculum around anti-racism that's getting launched, I think, in a couple weeks. But put yourself in the spaces where these things are happening and in the language that is motivating for you. And the fact that we're a Christian group in this conversation, our local presbytery is holding and leading this, I think lean into that, because there are spaces where folks can sense the Spirit calling them to be different. And that's also, as a person of color, there are things that I have internalized. I am so grateful to be a Black woman in America, but I also know that there are things that I have internalized that keep me from seeing my most whole self. So I have to do the work to detangle how white supremacy culture has affected me as well. So there's work to be done in all embodiments when it comes to how to be more faithful and to push up environmentally and just within the larger conversation of race as well.
Last thing I'll add is kind of as a parent and as a wife to a youth minister with children. One is a very quick story about my child who was learning about quote unquote colonial explorers. And there is a lot of difficulty in terms of learning about the exploration of European white people on native land here in America. And, we had conversations with my son, and he said when he went to school and talked to him with the teacher, he said, she was scared, Mom. She wouldn't talk about it. And so I think not being afraid is so critical. And watching my husband with the youth at church, one thing that I really appreciate is that he creates a fearless space, a space where it's okay to fail, and it's okay to get it right, and you're going to be loved by God no matter what. You're a beloved child of God. And I think as a white man, I also see him understand what his obligations are to teach himself, but that, you know, in terms of his youth, he also needs to have them see strong Black leadership. So one thing that he did was take them to I saw, Dennis, you put up NCEJN, he took them to the conference, because he said, you're going to learn so much more by hearing these stories and hearing and learning from these moments than anything I could ever tell you. And then let's come back and talk about it on your Christian path, on your journey, as, you know, a follower of Christ and as a youth member. So, you know, I think there's so much to be done with our children, and with our future, that I'm eager and excited to see a lot of work and investment there. Thank
you. Before we kind of begin wrapping up, because we know that we've crossed the hour, are there any other questions from our participants that you would like to ask our panelists? If you have one, please kind of put your name in the chat, and we'd be happy to call your name, and feel free to speak up. Anybody? Am I just not seeing hands? Let me go through the screens really quickly. Well, with that, oh, let me see. Okay, so Cynthia, would you like to ask your question with your unmuted, or be happy to?
I'm happy to. It's fine. Yeah. So I just put into the chat. This can feel so big, you know, and I think sometimes we feel like, well, what can I do? How can I make a difference? And clearly there are systemic things that need addressed in huge ways. But what can I do right now as an individual to lean into this? What choices can I make, not just in my thinking, but in my behaviors tomorrow to make a difference in this area? Because I'm one of those that believes all those little things add up into big things. I'm kind of an optimist in that way. And so I wonder what your answer to that would be.
Thank you for the question. Panelists? Anybody?
It looks like Daryl's got an idea. You want to start us off?
It's light and it's fun. Cynthia, I would like to ask you, are you into gardening? And if you are into gardening, try planting a pollinator garden. More specifically, plants that are native to North Carolina and plants that will provide nourishment for the monarch butterfly. That is something, that's a start. That may seem small, but that is a huge piece of the pie when we talk about being good stewards of our pollinators. And also, if you're interested in just having some very candid, safe conversations, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm open to that. I just love people. I'm very candid. I'm a dispenser of grace. And I just like to connect with you to just have some conversations myself. I'm willing to do that.
Thank you, Daryl. I will say I do have a garden, and I do try to plant pollinator-friendly things to attract them to the garden, and then get on all my neighbors when they spray for mosquitoes. So maybe I'm doing something right.
You are doing something right. Okay. You are, absolutely. Thank you.
My very practical suggestion is declutter your house and share your things. There is probably things that someone else needs right now that is sitting in a closet somewhere or sitting in a space that's not being used. And rather than them going without it, or there being another one produced because they go and buy it, whatever the case may be, to really work on sharing that I really appreciate what Jessica offered. I have a 4-year-old and a 12-year-old. And so much of this basic character development is just being able to be compassionate. And one of the easiest things that we say in our, caring is sharing. So if you've got things that are just taking up space, one, it'll be good for you to declutter, because then you're freer and it's taking up less, whether it's being heated or used, it's not taking up that space. But it also can actually reduce the amount of carbon footprint just because something else is not being produced.
So I'll just say that the thing that I always say to everybody is get your hours in. If you are fighting for justice in some way, like just keep getting those hours in. I think something my husband would say, which is so hard, is to connect with somebody, to find a real way to connect with somebody all the time. We have gone, and right now it's even harder, but we've gone from a place where you could easily interact with people to where you can drive out of your garage and down a street and into another garage and pick something up where they put it in your trunk and you drive back into your garage. And so find ways to connect, and find ways to connect with people who are different from you.
I think with that, getting our hours in, I think we can all, know that we've at least gotten 1 hour in tonight with all, amongst all the hours that we have. And so, so thank you to the 3 of our participants, for our panelists, for speaking also tonight. Thank you so much for all the work that you do in your ministry. Dennis, I'll turn it over to you for any last concluding thoughts.
Thank you, everyone. Almost everyone hung with us for an additional 15 minutes or so of, as I posted in the chat, a very rich conversation. I suspect this is the first of, and not the last. So stay tuned for that. Let's close with a word of prayer. Creator God, we thank you for this time this evening of brotherhood and sisterhood. We thank you for the life of our brother Martin, for his dream that we're still at work perfecting. We thank you for the opportunity to serve and preserve your creation. We thank you for the rewards when we taste and see that your creation is good. And as we go our separate ways this evening, we are reminded once again of the words of the prophet Amos, calling for justice to roll down like waters and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
We know where to find you all. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Dennis.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for letting me learn with everyone. This was awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Good night.
Blessings and peace.